2. Nakamoto Tatia was seething with rage this morning. It was a tinkling sensation, and the first thing he had been aware of in the cold bed only a couple of hours ago. Now, as he gazed towards Nanking's China Gate through the morning haze, the tinkling sensation he felt gave way to a sense of urgency, and he could feel and hear his breathing quicken. Nakamoto was smartly dressed in a thick wool uniform, his white-gloved left hand resting on the handle of the Sadamitsu at his hip, an ornamental sword made at the beginning of the reign of the Roa Emperor and bequeathed to him by Okasan Mama. He could feel the muscles of the strong-limbed mare underneath him twitch spasmodically as she exhaled steamily in the fresh morning air. A sudden flash from the rising sun struck his tall figure. He had to look tall, sitting astride the grand mare, and the right side of his face glowed with a ticklish warmth. Nakamoto wondered how he looked to Lieutenant Colonel Tajima, standing only a few meters to his left, also gazing toward the China Gate intently, and to Zamba, his orderly, who stood directly behind. If Ime Yoshio or any other correspondent happened to be present, he could take a snapshot of Nakamoto in silhouette facing the wall. Such a picture would certainly complement a headline in the Asahi Shinbun, Asahi Graph, or any other major newspaper back home. Brigadier General Nakamoto Tatia poised to take Nanking. He knew that at this moment his brigade was only one of the many that had besieged the city and were ready to go in for the final kill. Nevertheless, toying with the idea of the picture and headline had relaxed him. He breathed more easily. "General," said Tajima, "once the engineering unit gets its job done, we'll be ready to move in." Nakamoto nodded. He had selected the best of his troops, Tajima Yasunori's battalion, for what would be this decisive final assault. Although thin and small in stature, Tajima had proved to be the most dependable among Nakamoto's battalion commanders. His soldiers had been hardened by battles fought from Shanghai all the way to Nanking. Nakamoto felt his rage simmer. Its source was no mystery. Last night, the brigadier general had enjoyed a feast of steamed pork rolls, sautéed chicken, stir-fried cabbage, and homemade rice wine. His staff had collected these from units which had been requisitioning on the side while chasing retreating Chinese troops and hunting down straggling soldiers in the surrounding area. After the feast, he stretched out in a cushioned chair, sipped sake, and watched his staff break into spirited singing. Affected by the joyous mood, he hummed along now and then, and his staff sang all the more cheerfully.
What had ruined an otherwise perfect evening?
When he finally turned in, he tossed and turned in the cold bed most of the night. He didn't get a good night's sleep because he missed his long bath. He didn't get a long bath because even the biggest house of the village, the Brig ward, tiled-roofed, multiple-room residence abandoned by a rich landowner, was not equipped with a bathing facility. After a frantic search inside the house, Zamba, his orderly, found a wooden bathtub filled with dirty clothes in the yard outside. Chinese were such useless, filthy people. The land was vast, 100 times bigger than that of Japan, perhaps, and 1,000 times richer in natural resources. But what had they done with it all? Why didn't they at least have a decent bathing facility installed in their residence? Did they ever bathe at all? When he finally stripped himself in the main bedroom and sat in the wooden bathtub Zamba had washed clean, Nakamoto bathed gingerly, cautiously. The water in the pond in front of the house looked harmless enough, but who knew whether or not it was contaminated? All Zamba could do was to bring the water to a boil, and even then he still could not trust it completely. Nakamoto felt filthy, irritably filthy this morning. He felt his skin had crusted with the dust and sweat of the day. "Zamba, the brigadier general barked. Yes, General, the orderly replied from behind. If you can't get me a decent bath today, I'll have you skinned. Yes, General. Nakamoto could hear machine guns chattering along Purple Mountain to the northeast. Sporadic but fierce skirmishes had been occurring along various odds of the mountain, he had been told. General Matsui Iwan had issued an order not to destroy the sacred grounds of the main mausoleums because it would reflect poorly on the imperial glory of Japan. Even the mausoleum of Dr. Sun Yat-sen, built only about 10 years ago, would be spared. As a result, use of heavy artillery in that region had been limited. He understood the commander-in-chief of the Central China Expeditionary Force, yet couldn't help wondering what he, Nakamoto, would have done if it had been up to him. Would he have preferred the use of heavier firepower? In a heartbeat. A quicker victory and considerable less Japanese casualties. Another wonderful headline in the making. The desire came back again, furiously. He wanted a long, delicious bath now, and all the scented, warm memories of his adolescence. A young Nakamoto has arrived early on a hot summer afternoon to vacation for a week with his auntie's family, who lives on the serene outlying peninsula in Nagasaki Prefecture. He's exhausted and drenched in sweat. Auntie arranges for him to take a bath to help recover from the long hours of journeying through rugged, hilly terrain on foot. He soaks in the huge tub filled with hot water, leans back, eyes closed, and stretches out his tired limbs luxuriously to let the water momentarily carry his body afloat. When he finally finishes bathing, Auntie shows him to his room not far from the bathroom.
He dozes off almost immediately after his head hits the pillow.
The first thing he hears upon waking up is Auntie telling Ryoko, his cousin, to lower her voice. Apparently, Ryoko has just returned home. Daddy is napping. He hears Ryoko's soft voice replying in acknowledgement, soft footfalls going in the direction of the bathroom. Then there comes a crystal, unrushed tinkling sound, like a little creek trickling down a pebble-filled slope, pearls dropping onto the smooth surface of a refined porcelain plate. He feels his face catching fire instantly. Then there is the sound of water gently splashing. His body bursts into flame furiously. Ryoko is the prettiest thing he has ever set eyes on. Just one glance at her large liquid eyes and her round face would set his heart racing wildly. He knows that Ryoko, whom he has dreamed about so many times before, is now naked, is bathing in exactly the same water he bathed only moments ago. Their bodies now are intermingling in an indirect yet most intimate way. He pictures her body, once shielded by kimonos, now revealed. He strains, but the pictures are blurred, yet it is enough to send his body raging with fierce desires. Brigadier General Nakamoto breathed audibly. A groan almost escapes his pursed lips. Turning his head to the left, he saw Tajima and the commander of the artillery unit barking orders to their troops. There was still time to continue the reverie for just a bit longer. Nakamoto now turned his thought to the sensuous gift he had bought for himself for having survived the Ikogaya Military Academy after 6,147 hours of intense class work and private study, a ruthless regimen of daily exercises and drills which left him like a toad stranded in a dry pond, and the yelling, pushing, and slapping the face from sadistic officers and upperclassmen. And for having punished himself long enough with a monk's life to purify himself. For what? Damn, why that hideous memory now? An inauspicious sign? No, nothing could be inauspicious at this juncture in his life. Of that he held no doubt. What was that young geisha's name? Namiko? Yoshicho? It happened almost 20 years ago, yet he could still recall every single detail. except for her name, of course. The young geisha is not older than 15, perhaps, having taken a long, delicious bath in his room at an upscale inn. Nakamoto, a newly commissioned young officer, is sipping sake, jinjushu, his favorite kind, with its rich taste, at a table, waiting. A gentle knock sounds at his door. She's dressed in brightly colored kimonos. Her rich dark hair is fixed high on her head. Her moon-shaped face is roached just right, and the dura lips of her small mouth are like cherry blossoms. In small pink-toed steps, the young geisha walks toward him, long eyelashes fluttering timidly over a lowered gaze. The air is dizzying with her fragrance, a flower blooming nervously, ready to be picked. He turns her round, shivering with urgent expectancy. Take your time. He remembered telling himself even now, so many years later. Enjoy it deliberately, so that you can relive every moment of it for the rest of your life. After all, being the Mizua's patron of a young geisha will probably be a once-in-a-lifetime experience for him. He wants to make sure that it will be worth every cent of the 200 yen he has paid for the privilege. Even now, sitting astride the mare in a faraway country, just moments before a massive assault was about to start, Nakamoto could still recall vividly the sensations he experienced when his fingers touched the cool, creamy skin of the nape of the young geisha's neck, removing her obijin, the cord that held the obi, or sashes, high between her shoulder blades, struggling clumsily with a knot. Did he imagine hearing a soft, nervous giggle coming from the young geisha's throat, unwinding the obi ever so slowly, letting it fall to the floor? The brigadier general breathed more audibly. Even the mare underneath him seemed to twitch with him in excitement. He turned to the left again. Tajima and the commander of the artillery unit were ready. The final assault would start at any moment. Nakamoto once again trained his binoculars onto the citadel on top of the wall in front of him. Famed to be the largest ancient citadel in China, it was about 15,000 square meters in size, if the intelligence report was accurate. In addition to the gate right beneath the citadel, China Gate had 3 other smaller citadels, all connected by a string of 4 arched gates. There were also 27 caves scattered within these gates, the largest of which could hold a garrison of about 1,000 soldiers. Tajima, he said, without turning his head. Sir, Tajima stopped in the middle of a sentence to the commander of the artillery unit and turned his face toward the brigadier general on the right. Taking China Gate will be no different from deflowering a young geisha. You'll have to peel off layers of barrier before reaching her naked self, Nakamoto thought. He decided against sharing this analogy with his subordinate officer. Ready? Nakamoto said instead. Yes, sir. The brigadier general raised his binoculars again. He could see individual limestone blocks in the wall. So many of them looked grotesque, having been scarred by machine gun fire and shrapnel from airborne bombs. Nevertheless, the wall still stood, the last barrier between him and what he wanted. The forced march from Shanghai to Nanking, taking Suzhou, Wuxi, Changzhou, and Zhenjiang along the way, was also like tearing off layer after layer of clothing. Now they had reached Nanking, the heart of China. She would be standing or prostrate on the ground before him in stark nakedness in just a few short moments, ready for the taking. Unlike a virgin geisha, however, Nakamoto knew that Nanking had been torn and pounded many times before and was covered with deep scars. He was about to inflict many more wounds, and he was not going to feel sorry about it. Why should he? How many of his brave troops had fallen while landing on the shore of Hangzhou Bay to the south of Shanghai, taking Suzhou, Wuxi, Changzhou, Zhenjiang, all the way to the high points of the outskirts of Nanking? These damn Chinese troops. They were supposed to be poorly armed, poorly trained, lacking fighting spirit, yet they had put up such a fierce fight in Shanghai and had caused thousands of Japanese casualties. The battle there had dragged on for 3 months instead of being over in a week as planned. And what about the plan to take over the whole of China in 3 months? They were such untrustworthy people too. Chinese General Tang had wanted to negotiate a truce. Some tentative agreements had already been reached, which would have given the Chinese troops time to withdraw while allowing the Japanese troops to march into the city peacefully. However, Tang's envoy failed to appear at noon 2 days ago, the deadline set by General Matsui. Now, many more of the emperor's warriors would have to fall before victory could finally be seized. And what about the Chinese Huagunyang? They were as flower-like as Ryoko, Namiko, or Yoshicho, whatever their names were, but so unsophisticated and so uncooperative. They were not game for any fun at all. They had to spoil everything every time. Some had swooned before he even laid a finger on. Some could not stop shaking convulsively, as if having been bitten by a snake. One, a real virginal beauty, kept sniveling so hysterically that her nasal mucus and tears had horribly soiled the furisoda, that colorful kimono with wide flowing sleeves, and the snow-white shiromuko, or bridal robe. He had thoughtfully packed a small trunkful of such kimonos before leaving Japan. Nakamoto shook his head in disgust at the sight of the tainted kimonos. If he had flown into a rage, and who could blame him? Perhaps the Huagunyang in Nanking would be different. Suddenly the ground underneath and around him trembled. Cannons and tanks roared, while bombers with rising suns on their wings droned overhead toward the city. The mayor moved uneasily beneath him. Under the cover of intense shelling, soldiers from the engineering unit now made a dash toward the base of the wall. Several tremendous explosions came from the direction of the China Gate. The sky was blotted out by thick black smoke, dust, and debris. More earth-shattering explosions. Machine guns barked furiously. Nakamoto Tatsu's brave soldiers raised an exhilarating battle cry and charged forward. A few minutes later, the smoke and dust began to dissolve. A huge dent was made in the wall, and China's biggest ancient citadel was nowhere to be seen. A lone soldier was waving in the rising sun on top of an enormous pile of smoking ruins. "Banzai!" he shouted. All his warriors joined in the frenzy. "Banzai! Banzai! Banzai!" Nakamoto drew his sword, raised it above his head, gave the mare an impatient kick,